The whispers started the day Penelope Marshall's husband told the doctor she was seeing visions that were not there. And by sunset, every soul in Cripple Creek, Colorado knew that Richard Marshall had declared his wife touched in the head. It was the spring of 1892, and Penelope had committed no crime except speaking her mind about her husband's gambling debts and his wandering eye toward the saloon girls who worked at the Golden Nugget. Richard had grown tired of her questions, tired of her rightful anger, and so he had done what men of means sometimes did when their wives became inconvenient. He spread the word that she was mad, unstable, prone to fits of hysteria that made her see things and hear voices. The lie took root in the mining town faster than wildfire through dry grass. Penelope found herself suddenly alone in a community where she had lived for 3 years. Women she had taken tea with crossed the street when they saw her coming. Shopkeepers refused to meet her eyes. The minister's wife, who had once praised Penelope's needlework at the church social, now clutched her children close whenever Penelope appeared, as though madness might be contagious. Richard moved through town with sympathetic nods following him everywhere, the poor burdened husband who stayed faithful to his afflicted wife out of Christian duty. The truth was that Penelope's mind was as sound as anyone's, perhaps sounder than most. She saw her husband's cruelty for what it was, a calculated destruction of her reputation so complete that no one would believe her if she spoke against him. He controlled their money, their home, and now he controlled how every person in Cripple Creek saw her. She was 24 years old, and her life had become a cage with invisible bars. She took to walking early in the mornings before most people stirred, finding solace in the mountains that surrounded the town. The peaks still wore their winter snow even as spring flowers pushed through the soil at lower elevations. On one such morning in late April, she walked farther than usual, following a creek that ran cold and clear from the melting snowpack. She was watching the water rush over smooth stones when she heard the horse approaching. Penelope tensed, preparing for another encounter filled with averted eyes and hurried excuses. But when she looked up, she saw a man she did not recognize. He sat tall in his saddle, his hat pushed back enough that she could see a weathered face that looked to be perhaps 30 years old, with eyes the color of summer sky. He was leading a pack horse loaded with supplies, and when he saw her, he touched the brim of his hat in greeting. "Morning, madam," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that Penelope had not heard directed at her in weeks. "Fine day for a walk." She stood there, momentarily speechless. He was looking directly at her, not through her or past her, but at her as though she were a person worthy of acknowledgement. "Good morning," she managed, her voice rough from disuse. The man dismounted with easy grace and led his horses to the creek to drink. "Name's Mason O'Brien," he said. "Just rode in from Wyoming. Heard there might be work in these parts for a man who knows his way around cattle and horses." "There might be," Penelope said carefully. "The ranches outside town often need hands, especially coming into summer." Mason looked at her with genuine interest. "You know the area well. I have lived here 3 years." She hesitated, then added, "Though I do not get into town as much as I once did." Something flickered in Mason's expression, a thoughtfulness that suggested he heard what she had not said. "Sometimes the best company is the mountains and the quiet," he said. "I have spent more time with horses than people these past few years, and I cannot say I have suffered for it." Penelope felt something loosen in her chest, some tight knot she had been carrying. This stranger spoke to her as though she were simply another person he had encountered on the trail, nothing more and nothing less. "The horses are likely better conversationalists than most people anyway," she said, and was surprised to hear something almost like humor in her own voice. Mason smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. That is the truth of it. They are honest creatures. They do not pretend to be something they are not. They stood in companionable silence for a moment while the horses drank their fill. Penelope knew she should make her excuses and return home before Richard woke and found her gone, but she was reluctant to leave this small pocket of normalcy. "I should let you continue on your way," Mason said finally, gathering his reins. "But I wonder if you might point me toward the most reputable ranch owner in these parts. I have found that asking locals serves better than just riding up to the first spread I see." Penelope considered. "The Patterson Ranch, about 5 miles northwest of town. Jacob Patterson is fair and honest, and he treats his hands well. Tell him you spoke with Penelope Marshall, though I cannot say if my name will help or hinder you." Mason's eyes sharpened with interest at that, but he did not pry. "I will tell him, and I thank you for the guidance, Mrs. Marshall." He swung back into his saddle with practiced ease. "I hope we meet again." He rode off following her directions, and Penelope walked slowly back toward town, carrying the memory of that simple, respectful conversation like a warm stone against her heart. She did not expect to see Mason O'Brien again, but 2 days later she encountered him outside the general store. She had gone early, hoping to avoid the worst of the stares and whispers, but Mrs. Henderson, the shopkeeper's wife, had still made a show of moving her small daughter away from Penelope as though she carried plague. Penelope was leaving with her few purchases, her cheeks burning with humiliation, when she nearly collided with Mason on the wooden sidewalk. "Mrs. Marshall," he said, steadying her elbow as she stumbled. "Are you all right?" The genuine concern in his voice nearly undid her. She blinked back tears that had nothing to do with the near collision. "I am fine, thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Did you find the Patterson Ranch?" "I did, and I start work tomorrow. Your recommendation served me well. Mr. Patterson spoke highly of you." Mason's gaze moved past her to the store window, where Mrs. Henderson was watching with obvious disapproval. His expression cooled. "Though I am beginning to think this town does not deserve the good people in it." Penelope pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "You should not be seen speaking with me. It will not help your prospects here." "My prospects are fine, and I will speak with whomever I choose," Mason said, his voice carrying clearly. Several townspeople were now watching, and Penelope felt panic rise in her throat. Richard would hear about this, and there would be consequences. "Please," she said quietly. "You do not understand. My husband, he has told people that I am not well, that I am mad. If you associate with me, they will think poorly of you." Mason's jaw tightened. "And are you mad, Mrs. Marshall?" She met his eyes directly. "No more than you are, Mr. O'Brien." "Then anyone who says otherwise is either a liar or a fool, and I have no use for either." He tipped his hat to her. "Good day, Mrs. Marshall. I hope to see you on one of your morning walks again soon." He strode past her into the store, leaving Penelope standing on the sidewalk with her heart hammering. Through the window, she could hear him greeting Mrs. Henderson with pointed courtesy, asking after her daughter by name and complimenting the child's hair ribbon. His message was clear. He was not afraid of association with Penelope, and he would treat her with the same respect he showed anyone else. That night, Richard came home late smelling of whiskey and perfume. He grabbed Penelope's arm hard enough to bruise. "I heard you were making a spectacle of yourself in town, throwing yourself at some drifter cowboy. Do you have no shame, no sense of what is proper?" "I spoke to him for 2 minutes on the street," Penelope said, trying to keep her voice level. "The same as anyone might speak to a neighbor." "You are not anyone. You are my wife, and you are sick in the head, and people are beginning to wonder if I should not have you committed to an asylum for your own protection." Richard's breath was hot and sour against her face. Keep away from that cowboy, Penelope. I will not have you embarrassing me further." He shoved her away and stumbled to their bedroom, slamming the door. Penelope sank into a chair, her arm throbbing. The threat of the asylum was not an idle one. Richard had the power to have her committed on nothing more than his word as her husband. She would disappear into one of those terrible places, and no one in Cripple Creek would lift a finger to help her. She barely slept that night, and when dawn came, she did not dare take her usual walk. But the mountains called to her, and the four walls of her house felt like a tomb. 3 days passed before she could stand it no longer. She rose before the sun and slipped out of the house, walking quickly toward the high country. She had been following the creek for perhaps 20 minutes when she heard hoofbeats and turned to see Mason riding toward her. Her first instinct was to send him away, to protect him from Richard's anger, but the sight of a friendly face made her resolve crumble. "I hoped I might find you out here," Mason said, dismounting. "I have been riding this way each morning, though I was starting to think you had left town." "I should have stayed away," Penelope said. "My husband is angry that we spoke. He threatened to have me committed to an asylum." Mason's face darkened with fury. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that he is my husband and I am supposedly mad, and the law allows him to do as he sees fit." The words came out bitter and hard. "He has turned this entire town against me with his lies, and there is nothing I can do about it. My own word means nothing." "Then we will have to show them the truth," Mason said firmly. "How? No one will listen to me. I am just the mad wife that poor Richard Marshall is burdened with." Penelope felt tears threatening again and fought them back. "You should stay away from me, Mr. O'Brien. Richard is vindictive and he could make trouble for you as well." Mason stepped closer, his expression intense. "I have been pushed around by bullies and cowards before, Mrs. Marshall, and I have never backed down yet. I am not about to start now. Your husband is a liar and everyone in town is a fool for believing him." "But how can you know that?" Penelope asked. "You barely know me." "I know what I see. I see a woman who speaks clearly and thinks logically. I see someone who knows these mountains and this land, who walks with purpose and meets my eyes when we talk. I see strength, not madness." Mason's voice softened. "And I see someone who has been treated with cruelty instead of the kindness she deserves." Penelope felt warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she had almost forgotten. Hope, perhaps, or something even more dangerous. "Why would you risk yourself for a stranger?" "Because it is the right thing to do, and because you are not a stranger anymore, Penelope." "May I call you Penelope?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. He was the first person in weeks to use her given name with respect rather than scorn. "I have a thought," Mason said. "Mr. Patterson has mentioned that his wife could use help with their household and the ranch bookkeeping. She is not as young as she was, and their daughter married and moved to Denver last year. If you were to work there, you would be out of town most of the day. You would have purpose and income of your own, and people would see you functioning perfectly well, which would make your husband's lies harder to maintain." "Richard would never allow it," Penelope said, though the idea made her heart leap. "He wants me isolated and dependent." "Does he control your every move? Can you not make decisions about how you spend your time?" Mason's eyes were challenging. "Or will you let his cruelty win?" The question hung in the air between them. Penelope thought of the long, empty days in her house, the walls closing in, the weight of the town's judgment. She thought of Richard's hands on her arm, his threats, his satisfaction at seeing her broken. And she thought of this man who barely knew her but believed in her anyway, who offered her a lifeline without asking anything in return. "I will do it," she said. "When can I start?" Mason's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Today, if you are willing." I will ride back with you to speak to Mr. Patterson." They rode together, Penelope seated behind Mason on his horse because she had walked out on foot. She held carefully to his waist, aware of his warmth and solidity, the steady rhythm of his breathing. It had been so long since she had felt safe in another person's presence. Jacob Patterson and his wife, Martha, greeted them at the ranch house. Martha was a handsome woman of perhaps 50, with silver threading through her dark hair and eyes that assessed Penelope shrewdly but not unkindly. "Mason tells me you might be interested in helping around here," Martha said, inviting Penelope inside while the men tended to the horse. "Truth be told, I could use another pair of hands. My joints are not what they were, and Jacob has been after me to take on help." "I would be grateful for the work," Penelope said carefully, "but you should know that there are rumors about me in town. My husband has told people that I am not stable. I do not want to bring trouble to your home." Martha's expression hardened. "I know your husband, Mrs. Marshall. I have seen him at the card tables and stumbling out of the saloon. I have my own opinions about who in your marriage might not be stable, and it is not you." She poured coffee and pushed a cup across the table to Penelope. "You will work here 6 days a week if you are willing. I can pay you fair wages and you will take your meals with us. Jacob and I do not listen to gossip, and we judge people by what we see with our own eyes." Penelope felt tears spill over this time, unable to hold them back. "Thank you," she whispered. "You do not know what this means to me." Martha reached across and squeezed her hand. "I know exactly what it means. I was young once too, and I had my own troubles before I met Jacob. Women must look out for each other, dear. Lord knows the men will not always do it." Penelope started work that very day. She helped Martha with the household tasks, then moved to the ranch office where years of accounts and records needed organizing. The work was satisfying and consuming, and the hours passed quickly. Mason came in at midday with the other ranch hands for the noon meal, and Penelope felt his eyes on her, warm and approving. Over the following weeks, a routine established itself. Penelope rose early and walked to the main road where Mason would meet her, riding from his bunkhouse to accompany her to the ranch. They talked during those rides, sharing stories of their lives. Mason told her about growing up in Missouri, about losing his parents to fever when he was 16, about the years he had spent drifting from ranch to ranch, never quite finding a place that felt like home. Penelope told him about her childhood in Kansas, about her father who had died when she was 20, about how Richard had seemed charming and stable when he courted her, how quickly that facade had crumbled after their wedding. She spoke of dreams she had once had of opening a dress shop, of the patterns she designed in secret, of how small her world had become under Richard's control. "It will not always be this way," Mason said one morning as they rode through the awakening landscape. "You are rebuilding yourself, Penelope. I can see it happening. Every day you are stronger." "I feel stronger," she admitted. "Working at the ranch, having Martha and Jacob treat me with kindness, it reminds me that I am not what Richard says I am." "You never were," Mason's voice was fierce. "And someday everyone will know it." Richard, predictably, was furious about Penelope's new employment. He ranted and raged, but Penelope stood firm. She told him she was bringing in money for the household, which was true. She did not tell him that she was saving most of her wages in a tin box she had hidden at the ranch, building toward a future she could not yet quite envision, but that glimmered like a promise just out of reach. The town slowly began to notice that Penelope Marshall was functioning quite well despite her husband's claims of her madness. Martha made a point of bringing Penelope to church on Sundays, sitting with her in the Patterson family pew, a public declaration of support that could not be ignored. Jacob mentioned to other ranchers how capable Penelope was with the accounts, how organized and reliable. The whispers did not stop entirely, but they changed. People began to question Richard's narrative. Why would a madwoman be trusted with ranch bookkeeping? Why did the Pattersons, one of the most respected families in the area, speak so highly of her? As spring turned to summer, Penelope and Mason's friendship deepened into something neither of them spoke aloud but both felt intensely. It was in the way Mason's hand lingered when he helped her down from the horse. It was in the way Penelope's face lit up when she saw him. It was in the long conversations that stretched far beyond what was necessary, neither wanting to part ways. One evening in early July, they were riding back from the ranch later than usual. Penelope had stayed to finish organizing the last of the spring accounts, and the sun was setting in spectacular shades of gold and crimson. Mason had insisted on accompanying her closer to town than he usually did, concerned about her walking alone in the dimming light. They stopped at the creek where they had first met, and Mason dismounted to let the horse drink. Penelope climbed down as well, stretching her tired back. The air was sweet with the scent of wild roses and pine, and somewhere a bird was singing its evening song. "Penelope," Mason said, and something in his voice made her turn to face him fully. "I need to tell you something, and I hope I am not speaking out of turn." Her heart began to race. "What is it?" "These past months, getting to know you, watching you reclaim yourself, it has been the greatest privilege of my life." Mason took a step closer. "You are the strongest, smartest, most beautiful woman I have ever known, and I am falling in love with you. I think I have been since that first morning when you told me horses were better conversationalists than people." Penelope felt the world tilt and resettle. "Mason, I am married. Whatever I feel, and I do feel something for you, something deep and true, I am not free. I know. And I am not asking you to do anything about it right now. I just needed you to know. I needed you to understand that you are loved, truly loved, by someone who sees all of you and treasures what he sees." Mason's eyes were bright with emotion. "Whatever happens, wherever life takes us, I want you to carry that knowledge. You are worthy of love, Penelope. Real love, not the twisted mockery that your husband calls by that name." "I do love you," Penelope said, the words escaping before she could stop them. "God help me, I do. You have given me back pieces of myself I thought were lost forever, but I do not know what to do with this feeling. I am trapped. Then we will find a way to untrap you." Mason reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle and warm. "I am not going anywhere, Penelope. For as long as you need me, I will be here." They stood hand in hand as the stars began to appear overhead, and Penelope felt something fierce and bright kindle in her chest. Hope, yes, but also determination. She would not let Richard destroy her. She would not let fear win. But the path to freedom was more complicated than she had imagined. Word of her competence at the ranch and her friendship with Mason had reached Richard, and his fury grew proportionally. He began drinking more heavily, and his rages at home became more violent. Twice Penelope had to hide bruises beneath long sleeves and high collars. She said nothing to Mason, afraid of what he might do, but Martha noticed and pressed a pouch of herbs into her hand. "For the bruises," Martha said quietly. "And Penelope, if you need a place to stay, our door is open." "Always." "I cannot," Penelope said. "If I leave, Richard will accuse me of adultery and I will lose everything. The law will side with him." "Then we need to make sure the law sides with you instead," Martha said grimly. "Let me talk to Jacob. He has connections in town, people who owe him favors." A plan began to take shape. Jacob spoke to the doctor who had first declared Penelope sound of mind before Richard had pressured him to support the madness claim. The doctor, feeling guilty, agreed to write a formal letter stating that Mrs. Marshall showed no signs of mental instability, and that his previous diagnosis had been made under duress. Jacob also spoke to several businessmen in town who had lost money to Richard's gambling debts, painting a picture of a man whose own behavior was erratic and irresponsible. Meanwhile, Penelope continued her work at the ranch, building her reputation day by day. She began attending town socials again with the Pattersons, her presence impossible to ignore or dismiss. Women who had shunned her began to offer tentative smiles. The minister's wife apologized quietly for her previous coldness. It was late August when everything came to a head. Richard, drunk and belligerent, stormed into the saloon ranting about his faithless wife and the cowboy who had stolen her affections. He accused Mason publicly of adultery, demanding satisfaction in the form of a fight. Mason, who had been having a quiet drink after a long day's work, stood calmly and faced him down. "I have never touched your wife inappropriately," Mason said, his voice carrying through the suddenly silent saloon. "I have treated her with respect and dignity, which is more than you have ever done. You have abused her, lied about her, tried to destroy her reputation to hide your own failings. Every man here knows you are deep in gambling debts. Half the town knows you have been keeping company with women who are not your wife. You are a hypocrite and a coward, and I will not brawl with you like we are dogs in the street." Richard lunged at him, but Mason sidestepped easily. Several men grabbed Richard and held him back while he struggled and shouted. The sheriff, who had witnessed the entire scene, ordered Richard to go home and sleep it off. The next morning, the sheriff appeared at Penelope's door with Jacob Patterson and 2 other town elders. "Mrs. Marshall," the sheriff said, hat in hand, "we need to speak with you about your marriage and your husband's behavior." Penelope invited them in, her hands shaking only slightly as she poured coffee. They asked her direct questions, and for the first time, she answered honestly. She showed them the bruises that were fading on her arms. She told them about Richard's drinking, his gambling, his threats to have her committed. She spoke clearly and calmly, presenting facts without hysteria or exaggeration. When she finished, the sheriff nodded slowly. "We have been hearing troubling reports about Mr. Marshall for some time now. His debts are considerable, and several business owners have complained about his behavior. With your testimony and the doctor's letter, I believe we have grounds to bring charges of domestic cruelty and public disturbance." "What does that mean for me?" Penelope asked. "It means, madam, that with the right lawyer, you could petition for divorce on grounds of cruelty and abandonment of marital duties. It also means your husband would be in no position to make claims about your sanity. We have all seen that you are perfectly sound of mind." Divorce was scandalous, but it was possible. Jacob offered to pay for a lawyer from Denver, a man known for taking on difficult cases. The process was slow and painful, unfolding over months of testimonies and hearings. Richard fought viciously, but his reputation was in tatters. His own lawyer advised him to settle rather than face a public trial that would expose all his misdeeds. Throughout it all, Mason stood by Penelope with unwavering support, but always at a respectful distance. He would not give Richard or anyone else ammunition to use against her. They still rode together in the mornings, but they were never alone without a chaperone, usually Martha or one of the other ranch hands. "When this is over," Mason said one crisp October morning, "when you are free and clear, I want to court you properly. I want to take you to dances and bring you flowers and ask your permission to call on you like a proper gentleman." Penelope laughed, the sound full of genuine joy. "I would like that very much, though I feel as though we have already been courting in our own way these past months." "We have been friends," Mason said. "Good friends, deep friends, but I want to be your suitor and eventually, if you will have me, your husband. I want to build a life with you, Penelope. A real life built on respect and partnership and love." The divorce was finalized in December of 1892, just as the first heavy snows began to fall. Richard was ordered to pay Penelope a settlement that included money and some of their household goods. He left Cripple Creek shortly after, headed for parts unknown, and Penelope felt only relief at his departure. She was 25 years old and free for the first time in her adult life. She continued working at the Patterson Ranch, but she also began making her dresses and selling them to women in town. Her designs were elegant and practical, and demand grew quickly. Martha helped her set up a small shop in one corner of the ranch's main house, and by spring, Penelope had more orders than she could fill. Mason courted her throughout the winter and into the following spring, and it was the happiest time of Penelope's life. They attended church socials together, went on sleigh rides through the snowy mountains, sat by the fire in the Pattersons' parlor reading aloud to each other. Mason brought her small gifts, a book of poetry, a set of drawing pencils for her dress designs, a shawl woven in shades of blue that matched her eyes. In May of 1893, exactly 1 year after they had first met, Mason proposed on the bank of the creek where their story had begun. He had carved her a small wooden box inlaid with wildflowers, and inside was a simple gold ring. "I do not have much to offer you," Mason said, kneeling in the spring grass. "I am just a cowboy who works with horses and cattle. But I will spend every day of my life making sure you know you are valued and loved. I will never lie to you or hurt you or try to make you small. I will stand beside you as your equal and your partner. Will you marry me, Penelope?" "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married in July in the small church in Cripple Creek, with the Pattersons standing up as witnesses and most of the town in attendance. The same people who had once shunned Penelope now celebrated her happiness, and if she felt a touch of bitterness about their fickleness, she chose to let it go. She was moving forward, not looking back. Mason and Penelope built a small house on a piece of land they purchased just outside of town, close enough to the Patterson Ranch that Penelope could continue her work. Mason continued as a ranch hand, but he also began breeding horses, using knowledge he had accumulated over years of working with them. Penelope's dress shop thrived, and she took on 2 young women as apprentices. Their first child, a son they named Thomas, was born in the spring of 1894. He had Mason's blue eyes and Penelope's dark hair, and he was healthy and strong. A daughter, Caroline, followed 2 years later, with a temperament as sweet as her mother's and her father's steady nature. The years unfolded with the kind of gentle happiness that Penelope had once thought impossible. There were hard times, of course. The mining industry in Cripple Creek was volatile, and economic downturns affected everyone. Winters were harsh in the mountains, and there were illnesses and injuries and the ordinary struggles of life. But through it all, Penelope and Mason faced everything together, their partnership growing deeper with each passing year. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they sat on the porch of their house watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. Thomas, now 9, was teaching his younger sister to braid a rope, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Inside the house, supper was waiting and the warm glow of lamplight spilled through the windows. "You remember the day we met?" Penelope asked, leaning against Mason's shoulder. "Every detail," Mason said, wrapping his arm around her. "You were standing by the creek looking like you carried the weight of the world on your shoulders, and I thought to myself, there is a woman who deserves better than what life has given her. And you decided to be the one to give it to me," Penelope said softly. I decided to see you for who you really were, not who other people said you were. The rest just happened naturally." Mason pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "You saved yourself, Penelope. You had the courage to accept help, to fight back, to rebuild your life. I was just honored to be part of that journey." "We saved each other," Penelope said. "I gave you a home and a family. You told me once that you had been drifting, never quite finding where you belonged. Did you find it? Do you feel at home?" Mason looked at her, his eyes full of warmth and certainty. "I am home whenever I am with you. You are my home, Penelope. You and our children and this life we have built together. I would not change a single thing." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, the same stars that had watched over them that first night when Mason had declared his love. The children's laughter floated on the air, and somewhere a horse whinnied from the barn. The mountains stood eternal and strong around them, witnesses to all that had transpired. Penelope thought about the woman she had been, shunned and afraid, her spirit nearly broken by cruelty and lies. She thought about how Mason had seen her truly, had treated her with dignity when others had withheld it. She thought about the strength she had found within herself, the courage that had always been there but had needed someone to believe in her before she could believe in herself. "I love you," she said, the words as true now as they had been the first time she spoke them by the creek all those years ago. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for being the man you are." "I love you too," Mason replied, pulling her closer. "Always have, always will." As the night deepened, and the children were called inside for supper, Penelope and Mason remained on the porch a moment longer, hand in hand, looking out at the life they had created together. It was a life built on truth and respect, on partnership and unwavering love. It was the life Penelope had dreamed of during those dark days when dreams seemed impossible, and it was more beautiful than anything she could have imagined. The years continued to unfold in their gentle rhythm. Thomas grew into a fine young man who shared his father's way with horses and his mother's thoughtful nature. Caroline inherited Penelope's talent for design and her father's steady determination. 2 more children joined the family, a son named James in 1897 and another daughter, Elizabeth, in 1900. The house that had started small expanded with additions as the family grew. Mason built a larger workshop where he trained horses, and Penelope's dress shop eventually moved into a proper storefront in Cripple Creek, managed by her former apprentices, who had become skilled seamstresses in their own right. The business thrived, and Penelope's designs became sought after throughout Colorado. The Patterson Ranch remained a constant in their lives. Jacob and Martha aged gracefully, eventually turning over the daily operations of the ranch to their son, who returned from Denver with his own family. The bonds between the 2 families remained strong, forged in those difficult days when the Pattersons had stood by Penelope and Mason against the judgment of the town. Cripple Creek itself changed over the years. The gold rush that had built the town began to wane, and the population fluctuated with the fortunes of the mines. Some families left seeking opportunities elsewhere, while others remained, building lasting legacies in the mountain town. The wild lawlessness of the early mining camp days gave way to more settled community life with schools and churches and civic organizations. Penelope became known not just as a skilled dressmaker, but as a woman who helped other women in difficult situations. When wives came to her shop with bruises hidden under high collars or with stories of husbands who called them mad or worthless, Penelope listened. She shared her own story, offered practical advice, and connected them with people who could help. She worked quietly with the sheriff and local lawyers to ensure that women had recourse when their husbands became violent or abusive. She could not save everyone, but she helped where she could, paying forward the grace that Martha Patterson and Mason had shown her. On a spring morning in 1905, Penelope stood in her garden planting the season's first flowers. She was 42 years old now, with threads of silver in her dark hair and smile lines around her eyes. Her hands, though marked with the work of years, were still skilled and strong. Inside the house, she could hear Elizabeth practicing piano while James argued good-naturedly with his father about the best way to train a particular stubborn mare. Thomas, now 21, had recently married a sweet-natured girl from a neighboring ranch, and they were building their own home on a corner of the family property. Caroline, at 19, was in Denver learning advanced dressmaking techniques and planned to return to expand the family business. The nest was beginning to empty, though it would never truly be empty with grandchildren surely on the horizon. Mason came around the corner of the house, still moving with the easy grace of a man who had spent his life working outdoors, though his hair was now more gray than brown. He watched Penelope for a moment, just as he had watched her thousands of times before, with an expression of contentment and love that had never dimmed. "Need help with those flowers?" he asked, crouching beside her. "I would not turn it down," Penelope said, handing him a trowel. "Though I know you have a dozen other things you should probably be doing." "Nothing more important than this," Mason said, settling in to help her. They worked together in comfortable silence, their movements synchronized by years of partnership. The morning sun warmed their backs, and birds sang in the trees that Mason had planted when they first built the house. "You ever think about how it all started?" Penelope asked after a while. "How close I came to losing everything, including myself?" "Sometimes," Mason admitted. "And then I think about how strong you were, how you fought your way back. You inspire me, Penelope. You always have." "We inspired each other," she said, echoing words she had spoken many times before. "I could not have done it without you believing in me. And I could not have found home without you welcoming me in." Mason sat back on his heels, looking at the house, the garden, the mountains beyond. "This life we have built, it is everything I never knew I needed. Every morning I wake up grateful." "Even when James is arguing with you about horse training," Penelope teased. Mason laughed, the sound rich and warm. "Especially then. It means he is thinking for himself, learning to trust his own judgment. He will be fine. All of our children will be fine. We have given them a foundation of love and respect. They will build their own lives on that." Penelope reached over and took his hand, dirt-stained and work-worn, a hand that had never been raised against her in anger, that had always reached out to help and support. "I love you, Mason O'Brien. More today than yesterday, more tomorrow than today. And I love you, Penelope O'Brien, until my last breath and whatever comes after." He leaned over and kissed her, a sweet, gentle kiss that held the promise of all the years they had shared and all the years yet to come. They finished planting the garden, then walked together to the barn where Mason showed Penelope the new foal that had been born the night before. The little horse, all long legs and soft eyes, nuzzled against its mother while Penelope and Mason watched. Life continuing, generation after generation, building on what came before. That evening the whole family gathered around the dinner table, the conversation lively and full of laughter. Penelope looked around at her children, at Mason at the head of the table, at the home they had filled with love and warmth. She thought about the woman she had been, shunned and alone, and the woman she had become, surrounded by family and respect and genuine affection. The journey from there to here had not been easy, but it had been worth every difficult step. She had learned that dignity and respect were not things others could permanently take away, that strength could be found even in the darkest moments, And that love, real love, was built on partnership and equality and unwavering support. After dinner, as was their custom, Mason and Penelope took a walk together in the fading light. They followed the path that led toward the creek where they had first met all those years ago. The water still ran cold and clear from the mountain snowmelt, rushing over the same smooth stones. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Penelope asked. "You said the horses were honest creatures who did not pretend to be something they were not." "I remember," Mason said. "You were telling me something important, even then, that honesty and authenticity matter. That pretense and lies, like Richard's claims about me, would eventually crumble against the truth." Penelope stopped walking and turned to face her husband. "You taught me to be true to myself, to trust my own judgment. That was the greatest gift you ever gave me." "You already had that truth inside you," Mason said. "You just needed someone to remind you it was there. And Penelope, you gave me just as much. You taught me that home is not a place, it is people. You taught me that I was worthy of love and family and belonging. We have been teaching each other for 13 years now, and I hope we have many more years ahead to continue." They stood by the creek as the stars emerged overhead, the same stars that had witnessed every important moment of their love story. The mountains rose around them, eternal and strong, a fitting backdrop for a love that had endured hardship and emerged stronger for it. In the distance, they could hear their children calling for them, their voices carrying on the evening breeze. It was time to return home, to the warmth and light and laughter that awaited them. But they took one more moment, hand in hand beside the creek, to honor how far they had come and to look forward to all that still lay ahead. "Ready to go home?" Mason asked finally. "Always, as long as home is with you," Penelope replied. They walked back together through the gathering dusk, their shadows merging into one, their steps matched and steady. Behind them, the creek continued its eternal song, witness to a love story that had begun with a simple act of human dignity and had grown into something beautiful and lasting and true. The years would continue to pass, bringing their own joys and sorrows, their own challenges and triumphs. There would be grandchildren to spoil and great-grandchildren to marvel at. There would be hard winters and bountiful summers, losses that brought tears and victories that brought celebration. Through it all, Penelope and Mason would face life together, their partnership unshakable, their love constant. On a distant day many years in the future, when both were old and their children were gray themselves, they would sit together on that same porch and watch another sunset paint the mountains gold. Their hands would still be clasped together, weathered now but still strong. And they would speak again of that morning by the creek when a shunned woman and a traveling cowboy had found in each other exactly what they needed. But that was still to come. For now, on this perfect evening in 1905, Penelope and Mason O'Brien simply walked home together, surrounded by the life they had built and the love they had nurtured. They had proven that dignity and respect could triumph over cruelty and lies, that true love was possible even after heartbreak, and that the strongest foundations were built on honesty, partnership, and unwavering faith in each other. It was not a fairy tale ending because their story was not a fairy tale. It was real and true, forged in hardship and maintained through daily choices to see each other, value each other, and love each other fully. And that made it more beautiful than any fairy tale could ever be. The lights of home beckoned ahead, warm and welcoming, and Penelope and Mason walked toward them together, just as they had faced everything in their lives. Side by side, hand in hand, hearts forever intertwined. Their story had begun with shunning and had blossomed into belonging. It had started with lies and had grown into truth. It had emerged from loneliness and had created family. And in the end, that was the greatest triumph of all. Not just that they had survived, but that they had thrived, building something lasting and true from the ashes of what had been destroyed. Their love was a testament to the power of seeing others truly, of treating people with dignity regardless of what the world says about them, and of having the courage to fight for happiness even when it seems impossible. As they reached their door and stepped inside to the warmth and light and love that awaited them, Penelope looked back one more time at the mountains silhouetted against the darkening sky. She sent a silent thank you to whatever forces had brought Mason O'Brien riding into her life that spring morning, and a promise to never take for granted the precious gift of being truly seen, truly known, and truly loved. The door closed behind them, and the house filled with the sounds of family, of home, of a life well lived and deeply cherished. And somewhere in the mountains, the creek continued its eternal song, carrying with it the memory of where it all began and the promise of all that would continue for years to come.